The information provided in this podcast episode is for entertainment purposes and is not medical advice. If you have any questions about your health, contact a medical professional. This content is strictly the opinions of Lucas Owen and is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The references, claims, and scientific information linked to any products are only applicable to those listeners who are based in the US. If you are outside the US, this information does not apply to you. It is not intended to provide medical advice or to take the place of medical advice or treatment from a personal physician. All viewers of this content are advised to consult with their doctors or qualified health professionals regarding specific health questions. Thank you for listening to the Boost Your Biology podcast. My name is Lucas Owen. I uncover the most cutting-edge health information on the planet, ranging from hormones, nutrition, supplementation, fat loss, biohacking, longevity, wellness, and a whole lot more. Welcome to the Boost Your Biology podcast. What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the Boost Your Biology podcast. Today, I'm super excited because we have a very special guest joining me in the studio. And today's discussion is going to be centered all around ADHD. And we're going to try our best not to become too ADHD with the topic itself. So joining me on the show, we have a fellow naturopathic physician who has an incredibly versatile and informative YouTube channel. He's displaying cutting edge health information, very similar to what I like to do. So we have Dr. LeGrand. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Lucas, for having me. It's great to be here and great to always talk about ADHD and just different ways to approach it, for sure.
Yeah, no, maybe do you want to start out with outlining a little bit about your own personal journey? I mean, yeah. How did you get so fascinated into ADHD yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I have ADHD and also dyslexia myself. Definitely struggled a lot when I was a kid. I fell behind a lot in school, got in trouble quite a bit. And my mom, the first thing that was kind of discovered was actually my dyslexia. I just had a hard time. It took me until I was like almost 9 years old before I could actually even just start reading and writing. And I remember she took me to get assessed, and they wanted to actually put me in a special ed program, thinking that I actually needed really severe special needs. My mom didn't want me to put me through that process, so she decided to homeschool me instead. So bless her heart for going through it. She really wanted to pull her hair out because trying to just teach me how to read and write was just a lot of work. And she decided to just take that time herself and to teach me, and I'm really grateful for it. But schooling was always really, even after that, still a challenge. And the ADHD was definitely very prevalent. I knew my dad had issues with it. He was never really officially diagnosed, and I didn't really get officially diagnosed until I was actually in college to just seek for more additional help, try medications. I didn't like the medications. It could help me focus, but I wasn't myself anymore. I felt kind of like a zombie. I felt just really null. And I just didn't like the side effects of it. So that kind of started my journey of just looking for a different avenue of there's got to be a better way than this. There's got to be a different way to understand this. And so that kind of led me on my journey of understanding more about what I could do from more of a natural perspective. And when I came across just more holistic mind doctors that helped me understood the importance of my biochemistry and the imbalance going on there. And that kind of led me to my path in my journey of discovering about naturopathic medicine and just holistic medicine, and helping me really overcome my ADHD symptoms and help me kind of just optimize my brain. I always say that, ADHD is still a part of who I am. I don't think it's something that we treat. It's a part of who we are. And it's just something that we just need to learn to optimize that brain of ours, because we just think differently. And it helped me a lot when I was able to kind of figure that out. That helped me get through college. It helped me go to medical school, naturopathic medical school, and get through that. And now it's part of my passion is just helping others that suffer just like I did, and helping them, showing just a better way. And it's been quite a blessing and calling, I feel like, in my life to help others to achieve that optimal health in their own brain and not have to live with their ADHD and with suffering with it, but actually succeed in it.
Yeah, you mentioned around the fact that people with ADHD they think differently. They also sort of behave differently. Do you want to sort of, if you were to try and define, like, how do you define ADHD?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I think that definitely the ADHD community is very split on this. And I think it really depends on your experience, right? Of like how you were taught about it, or, how severe your ADHD is, because I believe that there's different degrees of severity with ADHD. And for me, like from my own experience, as a kid, like it was definitely prevalent, a problem for me, and I hated it. And and a lot of it associated around with just my challenges with school and just getting into trouble. And so I always hated the fact that I had these challenges. But over time, as I got older, I come to learn to not only like start unlocking those things, but I always think challenges is what makes us stronger. And I look at the challenges, I start to now embrace more challenges because it has made me who I am today. And I think without those challenges, there's no way I would got where I was. If life was just easy for me, and I've seen plenty enough of my own friends where life was easy and they're suffering, they're struggling, and they don't have things like ADHD. But I'm not saying here to say that like ADHD is like a blessing in its way, but I think if we embrace of just more of it, of who we are. So to me, like ADHD, there is, I mean, as the term is, it's attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Well, from my experience, for myself, but also even the clients and patients that I work with, because I only work with adults, the hyperactivity part, I feel like dissipates as we get older. Like even for myself, like when I was a kid, yes, I was a lot more hyperactive, a lot more high energy, but as an adult, not so much at all. Like I might be a little bit impulsive, but it's not as severe as it used to be. What's more prevalent, obviously not as bad as when I was a kid, but like it's more than just the attention deficit part of it. And to me, I think it's just more of a deficit of multiple things, especially adults with ADHD. It's deficit on looking at the body as a whole. So what I have found, like what kind of starts changing for adults with ADHD is that they start having a deficit in multiple parts of their body, not just the brain, but multiple parts that kind of overcloud and shadow, making it think it's just only the ADHD, but it's making just things worse altogether. And it gets missed so much because when they're going in for their ADHD, and the doctor's going to think it's just an ADHD situation. And so they don't think about, could you be having hyper or hypoglycemia, where you might be leading into diabetes? Are you having a thyroid issue? Are you having some severe hormone imbalance? Are you having an autoimmune condition? And it gets overlooked because they just think it goes right back to your ADHD situation, when those things really need to be addressed. And if we actually address those things, and what I have found by addressing those things, it makes a huge difference in someone's, not only in their ADHD health, but just their overall health. And so to me, I think like ADHD is like, how I look at it, it's like we are just more sensitive. We're more prone to a lot of these chronic illnesses. And so you could look at it as a double-edged sword. It's like, because we're more prone, we need to be more doubly vigilant in our health. And I've come across a lot of people with ADHD, and you have those people that really suffer because they get in this trap with their health. And then there's others that recognize that they have to be very vigilant in with their health. And so they become these super like health guru people that like just really understand that they have to, because if they don't, they're going to fall apart. And so you can kind of look at it as like a double-edged sword. And that's how I kind of see it, is that we're just very hyperly sensitive. And so anything that, I guess you could say, a normal person, I guess, if you want to kind of just say normal. I don't really like using that term because to me, I'm like, what is normal in my opinion? Yeah. But like someone who does not have ADHD they might not be as prone to getting type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or prone to a lot of different food sensitivities or having digestive issues, where someone with ADHD, they are definitely a lot more prone to that. Like we know that like people with ADHD have a 54% higher risk in developing Alzheimer's disease than someone who doesn't. So to me, it's just if we can understand that and like take it to approach that, like us people with ADHD, we just have to really consider all the other aspects of our health issues so that we can have that optimal health and optimal brain that everyone so desires and that doesn't get overlooked.
What about in terms of taking a very I guess like a closer examination in terms of someone's health? How do you go about understanding the bigger picture? Because, you know, as a naturopath myself, I understand that gut health can play a role, hormonal imbalance. Like, how do you go about assessing?
So that's really good. And you understand this from perspective of taking more of a holistic approach to things is, to me, the diagnosis is almost, it's dangerous. To me, if I always tell people, like, I care less about your ADHD diagnosis, because to me, it doesn't really give me much information. If I did and said, okay, it's your ADHD every time, I wouldn't be able to help you in the capacity that I do help with my patient clients. So like, to me, when someone comes in, let's throw out the diagnosis and actually look at you as an individual. It's like, okay, tell me everything that you're experiencing as far as your symptoms goes. And then when we can understand the whole picture, okay, you're experiencing, let's say, fatigue, you're experiencing brain fog, you're experiencing high anxiety, you might have high heart palpitations or panic attacks, or you're having moments of depression where you feel depressed a lot of times, or you're getting gassy and bloatiness, like, right? So like, try to treat the person without the diagnosis. Try to look at the person as an individual. And when you can kind of see a more fuller picture, then you're like, okay, now let's do some investigative work. So it's like, okay, it looks like we need to look at your digestive stuff, because there's already presented warning signs, as you could say. The body's like sending signals like, hey, I don't like what you're eating. Like, things are going on here. And I guarantee you that's going to impact your brain, right? Because the gut and brain, very interconnected. A lot of the gut microbiome, 90 to 95% of a lot of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut. People don't realize this. And so if the gut's not working optimally, the brain's not going to work optimally. So that's like a really good starting point, is like starting with the gut and then going from there. So if they're dealing with fatigue, well, there's a lot of reasons of why you could be fatigued. It isn't just your ADHD. It could be, okay, maybe your hormones are way off. Maybe you're dealing with a thyroid issue. Maybe there could be a micronutrient deficiency that we're missing here. And I've seen it where I'll run a full panel, and sometimes it's just a few micronutrients that are just deficient. And I did everything else, and then we find these micronutrient deficiencies. We add that, and like, it was that made the night and day difference. Like I had a patient that it was just vitamin D. It was literally just vitamin D deficiency, and we changed that one thing, and she was able to get completely off her ADHD medication. Like, she didn't need it anymore. So it's like, I don't think it's not like this cookie cutter system that a lot of us are used to think, okay, you got this diagnosis, so therefore take this medication. And especially when it comes to the brain, in my opinion, the brain, like when I was in medical school, like that is definitely the one area that is not very concrete. It's not very, talking about all the different mechanisms of actions, all the pathways, it's still a lot of it's theory. And I mean, we're getting closer, but if we talk about all the other organs, the heart, digestive system, the endocrine system, like those are a lot more understood, and we know what medication to implement when something goes wrong, like with heart. Like, you know, if someone has high blood pressure, well, okay, we know when to add that. Someone has type 2 diabetes because they have elevated hemoglobin A1C levels, they have high glucose levels, therefore we know to like add something like metformin or something like that. Like, that is lab work. But why, when it comes to the brain, we don't do any kind of testing, and we just do asking a questionnaire? Again, I mean, like, to me, like we're treating people as lab rats, just kind of just guessing. And it hasn't served us well, in my opinion. It hasn't served us well at all. And so I'm trying to take it from a different approach. It's hard to get enough information for the brain, but we could definitely look at all the other organs in the body to paint a picture of really what's going on, and going from there. To me, that's a better way of tackling it, of someone's health, than just doing a survey questionnaire and just going from there and just base it off of just taking some medication.
Yeah, you mentioned before about the vitamin D being one of the reasons why, you know, that basically eliminated the fatigue and reversed the patient's symptoms. Yeah. What about some other, like, has there been one other commonly overlooked I guess like pathway or
vitamins. Yeah. So some of the ones that I'm seeing currently, and this kind of applies to like anybody like 40 and older, is like choline and serine levels.
Yeah.
So those have a lot to do with memory. So those are different amino acids so, you know, you probably have heard of like phosphatidylserine or phosphatidylcholine as beneficial for the memory. I'm starting to see whenever I run those tests, people in their 40s or older, we start seeing those start to deplete, and those make a pretty big impact. Some other obvious, really big ones, probably one of the most important vitamins, I would say, when it comes to like, if we're talking about like neurotransmitters and the pathways, is vitamin B6. Why? Because vitamin B6 is pretty vital cofactor. So for your audience, like a cofactor is pretty much an important enzyme for helping like taking something from like L-DOPA to dopamine, like breaking that down and modulating it. So if you take vitamin B6, especially the activated form, so it's P5P is the activated form of vitamin B6. You look at the serotonin pathway, the dopamine pathway, and even GABA, it requires vitamin B6 in almost every single one of those steps. So you better believe it. If you're deficient in vitamin B6, you're gonna suffer in every single one of those pathways. And this is the thing that's not being addressed or looked at in conventional medicine. They're not looking at how can we look at other things that are very vital, because I do see it a lot where people will be deficient, especially people with ADHD. They will be deficient in vitamin B6 or even vitamin B12 is a big one. And those are some really critical ones. The other one that's really big is phenylethylamine, which is the very beginning of the dopamine process. So it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. And just a short term to it is called PEA. Like I even have a hard time always pronouncing it, phenylethylamine. There's too many L's and E's in it. I get made fun of it all the time. It's just like, hey, I got dyslexia. I got dyslexia, so I do my best.
There's also another PEA, the palmitoyl and ethylamide. That one.
Right. Yeah, I know they get it all mixed, but like, so it isn't specifically, I mean, you could take that directly, but usually the one that usually I find helpful is like taking DL phenylalanine, which is an amino acid that helps make tyrosine and also helps build also PEA. And that's just the very beginning of the dopamine process. And I actually see that one to be more deficient more than anything else than if we look at just like dopamine. It isn't always a dopamine problem from my experience with ADHD. There's so many other pathways. There's other things that can contribute causing these different symptoms. Another big one is what I find is adrenal insufficiency syndrome. So when your adrenals aren't sufficiently producing enough cortisol, a lot of people think that you're producing too much. It does happen. Don't get me wrong. But I have seen it more where there tends to be a cortisol deficit, where the adrenals are just not producing enough. And when that happens, especially throughout the day, it's hard to function. It's hard because cortisol is what actually gets us up in the morning. It's what actually gives us energy throughout the day. And if we don't have that energy throughout the day, you better believe it, you're not going to have focus throughout the day. It's going to be very difficult to have focus or drive or motivation. So that is like a whole different pathway than looking at just the dopamine pathway. But in a way, really presents the same way when they're both deficit. There's a deficiency going on there.
With the, I mean, you mentioned cortisol side of things and also the dopamine side. I mean, the phenylalanine, I've had a very, very positive experience with that over the years. Like
same here.
I actually
that's probably one of my favorite ones for me personally, because I tend to be deficient in it.
Yeah, I feel even if I put it under the tongue, like I'll get a really strong effect on alertness, mood, focus. I just feel phenomenal on that. And simply just, I mean, it's like what, 2 cents per serve. Like,
for sure.
So that there, I mean, if we look at the comparison between like when you see patients that have used these ADHD medications, what are the main like side effects that they typically complain about?
Yeah, so the main side effects I get when people are coming in, probably the most common one that I see is probably just feeling a lot more anxious, stressed, agitated, irritated, heart palpitations. And the reason why that's happening, at least for my belief, is why it's happening a lot, if you take something like Adderall or Ritalin, the whole mechanism of action, and again, a lot of these medications, there's still somewhat theory of what the mechanism, we don't know like the concrete, but because a lot of them are, based off of street drugs. And so we know that it can cause that euphoria effect. And of course we've patented, diluted it and made it into to help with something like ADHD. But what it's doing is it's supposed to be increasing dopamine and norepinephrine. And how it does that, it's blocking the feedback loop. So there's two neurons. You get the receiving neuron and the other neuron that are connecting. And it's firing dopamine all the time, different, and also serotonin, like back and forth. And the body will communicate, say, okay, slow down, like we're producing enough, you can slow down. And when you add the medication, it actually blocks that pathway. And when you block that pathway, what it does, it's just going to constantly produce dopamine. And that's how you can increase your dopamine levels. Now, why would that be kind of a problem? Well, when you do that for a long duration, and we've seen this in research, it can decrease the natural output that the body, because you're not communicating much anymore. And so the body starts slowing down of how much it wants to produce. And we've seen it can decrease it about 20%. And this is why there's severe withdrawal effects when someone goes completely, if they decide to go completely off, they are like, oh my goodness, like it's now not producing much at all because you've stopped the medication because the body's already slowed down. It's kind of like how the metabolism works in a way. Like, right, we know when you do a restricted diet over time, the body's metabolism starts to slow down because you're not asking for it to burn off more, right? So like in a way, it's kind of like that. And so what happens when that's one aspect, right? When people go through with withdrawal effects, if they go completely off it, which I never recommend, they need to slowly trade off. They're going to do that. But the other thing is why when people feel like anxious and agitated and irritated with it is because their body already produced too much dopamine. Now, that's probably something your audience have never heard of, or if people with ADHD, because they've always been told it's always a dopamine problem. But I've seen enough where we'll sometimes do these tests and we see that people can have elevated levels of dopamine. And what is the side effects of elevated dopamine levels? It is what I just said: agitated, irritated, high anxiety, stress. And then you add a medication on top of that, you're going to feel more of that. Now, maybe your audiences have heard of serotonin syndrome, and that's a real thing. I've actually seen it firsthand. It's not a pretty picture. I remember I had a kid who the doctor put him on an antidepressant, and the kid could not function. He couldn't go to school. Like he was like having like episodes of like schizophrenia, like bipolar, like he was all over the place. It was bad. And I ran these tests and saw that his serotonin levels were just skyrocketed. And I'm like, we got to get him off of this. This is just making things worse. And we did. And he was back to normal. His mother was completely grateful that I was able to see that. And so it's the same thing with the serotonin pathway. You don't want to elevate. And so that can happen with antidepressants. Some people can get worse. And so we have to be really careful. And people ask, like, well, why aren't doctors looking at this? Well, looking at neurotransmitters, it's looking at neurotransmitters throughout the body. A lot of people like to argue it's like, well, it's not specific to the brain. Well, yeah, it is. And we're not that. The science isn't evidence enough to just look at specifically neurotransmitters in the brain. But like I was saying before, 90 to 95% of a lot of neurotransmitters are made in the gut. In fact, majority of serotonin is made in the gut. About 50% or more of dopamine is actually made in the gut. So there's a lot throughout the body. And so that's what this test does, is kind of looking through all the different neurotransmitters throughout the body and not specifically at the brain. And to me, that's what I would like to see. It's just like throughout the whole thing. How is it deficient from that standpoint? And so we have to be really, just careful as far as, the symptoms when people are on the medications. The other things that people experience, like also like from my own experience, they'll feel numb, like a zombie. Like it'll help them focus, but they'll just feel numb and their personality is just not the same. That can be an issue. The other big complaint that I get when people are coming to see me and they want to get off the medication and do things more naturally is that consistency. So they'll have like this good boost of focus, but it'll drop off immediately for them in the middle of the day. So what I like to do is add supportive treatment. So, we work with a lot of people when they'll still do medications and then we'll add supportive treatment, whether that is through nootropics or some, supplement regimen, along with like a nutrition lifestyle treatment plan that will enhance the duration of their medications so they can have more consistency throughout the day. And then over time, they'll find they don't need to rely so much on the medication.
I'm also curious to know about different, what are some other supplements that you've seen people respond well to that maybe at the start of this entire journey, you probably thought, oh, there's no way this is going to have an effect. Like there's no way this is going to have any impact.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, probably like, and this, I feel like this kind of changes. I'm always updating of like what things I want to try out and test out. I always usually, a lot of times, as you probably can see, people can see it from my videos, I always test these 30-day challenges and test on myself before I test on my patients. And that's why we call it practice, right? It's like, this is my clinical practice. We call it a practice because we're always practicing because the body is very complex. But, one of the big go-tos that I really like is L-theanine, because L-theanine helps in every single neurotransmitter pathway. It helps in the dopamine pathway. It helps in the serotonin pathway. It also helps with GABA because it crosses the blood-brain barrier and helps enhance GABA levels. So, and then enhancing GABA can help with both the dopamine and serotonin. So it's definitely one of my favorites. But like back to your question is like, what is one that I've seen that I didn't think was going to work at all and tried it? I would say, try to think of anything like recent memory of,
like lion's mane, bacopa, rhodiola.
So lion's mane, I don't prescribe that one too often. I've done it myself and I did like it. Probably because I use that as like an additional add-on. Because it's kind of like an enhancer to help. I mean, we know it helps kind of with neuroplasticity. It increases neurotrophic factors, right? But like, it's hard to kind of explain from a lab testing of why to add lion's mane, if that makes sense. Vitamins and like amino acids, those types of nootropics are easy to explain why to add it. And then we can measure it like before and afters. Lion's mane, there's nothing, at least to my knowledge, to really like measure. I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? So, but like ones that have like surprised me just over the years is like ginkgo biloba. Even for myself, like when I was in college, I remember my uncle had me try this just high dose ginkgo biloba. He's like, hey, just try this, while you're in college, see if this helps you like pay attention more in school.
There's always that one uncle.
Yeah, there's always that one uncle, right? And so, because he had like he has a like he sold off. He actually sold it. It was a supplement company, but. I remember, taking it, and because I had a hard time, like when I would take notes, it would be hard for me to keep up with my professor. Like, oh, what would he say? Like, and I'd have to ask like my classmates and like try and just keep up. But as I would take that, not only would I like be able to like pay attention and start writing, but like my short-term memory like expanded, like because I was slow at writing, but I could remember still what was said before and keep ahead. It was weird. It was like one of these things like I felt like just like my memory, short-term memory was expanded, like where I can remember as he's like, if someone's like reading a paragraph, like I can still remember, 3-4 sentences and still write it down to keep up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I just remember that experience and well, when I do prescribe it to people, not to everybody, but like when I do, they kind of have like kind of a similar kind of experience. And so that one definitely always kind of surprised me. It's definitely one of my favorites because it's also, I don't remember what they call it in Chinese medicine, but like the look of a ginkgo leaf looks like part of a brain. Do you remember what they call that? Like there's like foods that look like, for example, walnuts.
Doctrine of signatures.
What is it called?
The doctrine of signatures.
Yes, right. Where something looks like what part of the organ and therefore it benefits that part of the organ or the part of the body, right? And so it's like Mother Nature telling us that this is what this is for. And it certainly does. And, with ginkgo biloba, it increases, blood flow to the brain and increases oxygen. And when it's increasing oxygen, it's going to increase nutrients to the brain and increasing that blood flow to the brain that the brain needs.
I feel like with ginkgo, when I first tried it, I could clearly feel like the GABA antagonism. Like I felt a little bit more like pushy and probably related to the norepinephrine reuptake inhibition that it has. Like I felt that the pushy nature of it. Yeah. That was awesome. Like being able to like actively, like proactively, like sort of initiate tasks. It was
Right.
awesome for that. So good for that.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course D-L-phenylalanine is a big one for me, that why I always actually recommend that one pretty frequently, especially when I could see that they're deficient. But that was a big one for me personally. And then when I put people on it, that one always surprised me of how much of a difference it makes.
What about some like common misconceptions around ADHD, and how does it impact daily living, for those that are suffering?
Yeah, no, I mean, probably the most common one I think that people get when they are if they were diagnosed back as a kid, or they're now just getting diagnosed as an adult, and they probably grew up them telling them, you're just lazy. That's probably the most common one that people will get. I get that as well. It's like, you're just lazy, and you're trying to just make an excuse for it. Others, especially the hyperactive thing, is because there's so many different types of ADHD that hyperactivity is just like one component. And so there's that misconception around that, like, you're just this out of control type of person, or, you're like that typical type person that's gets angry easily and is just impulsive and not thinking and just jumping head first. I mean, that happens, but what I have found, especially adults, we call it ADHD masking, where we try to hide that we don't have ADHD. And so, for a lot of people, it can feel really lonely. And that's what I love about, what we do in our program, is they're able to finally meet other people that experience this, so they don't feel like they're alone in this journey. And
is it more common in men or women generally?
So definitely more in men, as far as like the statistics has shown. We are seeing an increase for sure of women getting diagnosed. It's just because women present differently with ADHD. Usually they're going to be more inattentive. So there's always this funny meme that I see all the time that people push out. It's this mom holding, helping this boy swim in the swimming pool. He's like kind of like struggling, and it labels boys with ADHD. And then there's this girl like drowning basically, and it says girls with ADHD, and then on the bottom of the pool is the skeleton, and it says adults with ADHD. And it's pretty true, because all the attention when people think of ADHD, they think of a young boy with ADHD. They don't think of girls. They usually kind of get forgotten, and then adults, they're just completely forgotten. And
what about in the clinical trials? Do they do enough research on women as well?
They're starting to. I mean, there's definitely being now that they're starting to realize that women just present differently, which they present more just inattentive. They're a little more quiet and reserved. Usually will present more that way. They just are distracted and inattentive. So in a classroom, you might not recognize it, right? Because a teacher is always going to complain about the boy that's jumping off the walls and, distracting the rest of the class. Like, that's the one that's going to get the most attention. Whereas the girl that has ADHD, she's just, looking up at the ceiling and, just really distracted, or drawing, doodling a lot in her notebook. But they're not causing trouble, right? So they usually will get forgotten, and they'll go throughout their life and never realize they have ADHD. And that's why we're seeing such a huge influx of adults getting diagnosed, especially because of the pandemic. A lot of people came home. I mean, there's a lot of reasons of why there's such an influx, and now there's an issue with a supply of medications for people. But COVID, when everyone started coming home, their spouses were like, I think you might have ADHD. You should get assessed, because, the typical person, like, I think, what is it? Like average couple, like, spends like only like an hour, 2 hours a day with each other. And so when the pandemic hit, they were with them for 8+ hours a day, and they got to know their spouse a lot more, or their significant other, and realized, I think you got ADHD, you should get assessed. So we saw this huge influx of people coming in and getting diagnosed for the first time in their life. And we still are today. And it's great, but at the same time, now we're having people go in, and now we're getting a low supply of medications. And just going back to the medication thing, is like, I think if we actually addressed ADHD from a holistic approach first, and then see if you need the medication. Everyone's jumping right to medication because people just want that quick fix, but it never addresses the root of the problem. It doesn't.
I've spoken to a number of people who have their own, views and perceptions on like the root causes of ADHD. And some of them say things like, well, one person says that they believe the root cause is always trauma. But did you want to sort of elaborate upon that, whether or not, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can make it worse. That's what I would say. I would not say it's the root cause. From my personal experience, just working with others, I think a lot of people with ADHD tend to have trauma. I would say with me, like growing up as a kid, I didn't have like severe traumatic, experiences. But people I've worked with have. But there's been people I've worked with that have a very peaceful life. I've had people, they'll even come in and they say, you know what, I have nothing to complain about. My life has been peachy, but I'm not happy. And I can't function. I can't focus. I'm not successful, but I've had a good, have great parents. And, people argue, it's like, well, you haven't dived deep enough. I think what happened, like people who experience trauma, I think the ADHD is something, people like there's the inheritance, right? There's a higher degree of people with ADHD if you have a parent that has it, like my dad has it. So there's a couple of people in my family that have it, including myself. So there's definitely, you're going to have a higher increase of actually getting it if there's a parent that has it. And especially if you have both parents that have it, there's a higher chance that your child will have it. And so to me, I always think it's just, we are a unique type of people, that we are the movers and shakers of this world, and we are required to be in this part of this world to shake things up. And that's why I don't like saying like I treat ADHD. It's more like I help you unlock that ADHD brain of yours to really live to your fullest potential with your ADHD brain. Because I don't know, who wants to be normal? Like, I know that's like a common thing the ADHD community wants, is like, I want to be normal, but it's like, why? Like, to me, normal is boring, in my opinion. And you just need to know how to live with your ADHD and excel with it. And instead of trying to be normal, why don't you just surprise people? So as a kid, I also wanted to be normal. As I got older and the challenges, like a lot of my friends all were going to go into medical school, right? And I also wanted to go into medical school or like become a doctor. And all my friends, making fun of me because I was struggling so much in school. I was the least likely to make it. But as I got older through the challenges, I decided I was going to surprise people. And I did. I was the only one out of all my friends growing up. All the rest of them dropped out. They couldn't make it through chemistry. They couldn't make it through, all the hard sciences. But I was able to push through it. And so what people should really focus on is learn to just surprise people and disprove people. And we are a unique people that have to be those to shake things up. Like if you look at, actually, I remember seeing this survey. They found out that like 70% of entrepreneurs all around the world have ADHD or some undiagnosed ADHD symptoms.
Wow,
that's huge. Wow. And it makes sense because what makes a great entrepreneur is they have to be risk takers, which people with ADHD are great at. They got to be creative for the most part and visionaries, which us ADHD people, we love to daydream and we love to, vision things. And they also got to think outside the box, which a lot of people with ADHD know how to do that. They get very creative. So a lot of your like very successful entrepreneurs probably have ADHD, like guarantee it. Wow. And so we need to stop looking at ADHD as like this crippled disorder. And it's hard for people to hear that because especially for someone who's lived with ADHD their whole life, I have too. And I mean, that's the thing. When you get diagnosed with an adult, you have to have actually had the issues when you're a kid. Yeah. You don't actually, you're born with ADHD. Like that's why
is that the diagnosis in the US if they want to be prescribed?
Yeah. So they'll ask if you have the same kind of symptoms as childhood, because if you don't, you can't get diagnosed with ADHD. And it's because you're born with it. And that's why I don't believe ADHD is like a crippling disease or even though it is categorized as a mental disorder. I don't believe that. I just don't. I know it's in the DSM-5. I don't believe that. I just think it's a part of who we just are, and we'll always have it. And we just need to know how to live with it. It's like, I mean, if you think about like the Dr. Seuss book, the Star Bellies, that they didn't fit in. There's the ducks that, I don't know, in that book where there's the star bellies that they had stars on their bellies, and there was a group of ducks that didn't, and they were outsiders and they couldn't fit in. But what happened is there's a person comes by and puts stars on their bellies, and then the ducks that had the stars got all upset, so they went to the same guy and paid money to get removed the stars, and then they kept under this vicious cycle going back and forth, back and forth. Eventually got so crazy that everyone had like 2 or 3 stars and stuff like that. But the point I'm getting at here is, imagine if this world was all ADHD. Would we think it's abnormal? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't, right? But then no one would be really unique. You know what I mean? And so it's like trying to, forcing yourself to be normal is like fitting a square peg in a circle. Stop trying to be, the circle. Just stay as a square and like learn how to fit in your part of this world.
Yeah.
And I think the sooner people realize that they are just think differently. And a lot of times it's the entrepreneur route that I have found. when people with ADHD finally recognize that, but they'll still struggle being focused. They'll get squirrel brain and try 100 different ideas. But once they can kind of land on that thing that they really are good at and excel in that and focus on that thing, they'll do really well. And that's what I relied on as a kid. I used to read tons of biographies of other successful people that had ADHD and dyslexia.
What about in terms of like newer research that you're coming across now? Like I'd imagine you're scouring research articles. You're probably digging deep on PubMed as well, looking at new articles around this topic. Like, what have you discovered in, say, maybe like the last 6 months that's like completely blown you away? Has it been in any sort of like research article? I
just went to a longevity conference over this past week, and one of the guys there who I actually have come to know is Dr. Richard Abbey. He works with kids with ADHD mostly. He does sometimes work with adults, but he does a lot of neurofeedback. And there's a lot of new advancements that since last time I've looked at neurofeedback to really map out the brain. And what I would like to see, and where I'm seeing the research, because there's a lot of evidence with neurofeedback being effective, but what I would like to see, if there's a way to make neurofeedback a lot more affordable to use as a testing, to test, to actually, like, for example, and I'm probably, this is maybe like a tie-in for my YouTube channel. I'm planning on working with him so how I usually will do test a supplement or nootropic or even a diet, a treatment plan, any kind of thing. I always like to try to do some kind of lab testing before and after to kind of just show something. But I might be working with Dr. Richard Abbey is to actually do a full brain scan before I start something, whether like, hey, I want to try this nootropic. Let's see if it changes the map out of my brain of any capacity.
What's the brain scan? What does he call it?
So there's EEGs, EEGs, sorry. And there's Z-score. There's lots of different. It's been a while since I looked at this stuff like way back when I was in medical school. But I just was at the conference. I'm like, okay, this is fascinating. Like I need to like look into this again, because I remember when I looked at the studies, even back in medical school, they found it just as effective as medication.
Wow.
Without side effects. That being said, it takes a while for people to to retrain the brain. So for those who are not familiar with what neurofeedback you're basically retraining. It's like exercise for the brain, and you're pretty much hooked up. They're looking at all the different brainwave activity. And there's delta waves, beta waves, and stuff like that. They're looking at like pretty much, are you, especially if you're trying to focus on improving attention. And so you'll watch something like a screen, and an example could be like, your brain will give you feedback and it'll start darkening the screen if you're getting distracted. And so it's basically communicating your brain, and now your brain's like, oh, I need to change something. And just like with exercise, so you're getting that feedback. That's why they call it feedback, neurofeedback. You're getting that feedback, instant feedback constantly, and you're exercising it. You're exercising that part of the brain to retrain it so that it can function at its full capacity. So another thing that's fascinating, I don't know if you've ever gotten a chance to interview Dr. Amen. And he has several different aiming clinics, and I've taken his continuing education for doctors, but he does a thing called SPECT scan. So looking at blood flow throughout the brain. He's a double board certified psychiatrist, but he's doing something that definitely the psychological department don't like, because he's doing something completely off of mainstream. But he's all like, why do we not look at the brain? Like, that was his question when he was going through, medical schools. Like, here we are treating the brain, but we never look at it. But every other organ we addressed, we always look at it. So why is the brain special? And it's like, well, it's too complex. It's like, just because it's too complex, why aren't we pushing ourselves? Why aren't we investing more money in this? Like, even though that these tools that we have aren't like the best, but it's at least something. And why don't we start dumping more into it to make it better? My thing is, the pharmaceutical companies make too much money. Mm-hmm. Why would they want to get rid of that? I mean, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but here's my thing. I'm not here to say that medications are all evil. I tell my patients and clients they should stay on it if it's effective for them. But what I want people to understand, just like with any medication, and I know you believe this as being a naturopathic physician as well, is we need to treat medication as what it is. It's like emergency medicine. Like, it is used for its purpose when things are severe. So someone who has severe ADHD, we need to put them on medication so they can actually not think suicidally or go out of control, right? So we can kind of calm things down. But in the meantime, we should be taking efforts, being proactive to eventually get them off of it, just like with any other medication. But that is not the business model for the pharmacy companies and pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies, because that doesn't make them money if we can get them off of it. So
if you could conduct your own clinical trial on any intervention in regards to or in relation to ADHD, how would you set up that clinical study, and what would that involve?
Yeah, so I mean, if the money was not an issue, and we can do a huge study, like I said, I think neurofeedback is definitely advanced where we can, and I would want to do a combo of neurofeedback, SPECT scans, any possible scanning we can do, along with functional lab testing. So do it all, and if we want to just test, but we do that first. We do all the lab testing, we do all the brain scanning, and just get a good baseline and test one variable, right? So let's say we're okay, we see that you're completely deficient on this one amino acid, even though you're deficient on all these other amino acids. Let's just test one, just to not get this too complicated, but we're going to do all the testing for it and see if we see an improvement in your brain scans, your symptom outcome, and in your lab work, or the improving. Cool. Lab work, usually you could always see it improve, doing any kind of blood work, you can always see that, but it would be fascinating to see brain scans before and after, and also the symptom outcome. Is the patient actually getting better? Because when I see this research, what the problem I usually, when people are oh, it's not working, or natural supplementation doesn't work, if you look at a lot of the studies, they generally will be okay, let's take 100 people, random people, and do no testing. It's we're going to take 100 people with ADHD and let's test out ginkgo biloba. Oh, we only saw about 30% that it made a difference. And then 50% it made slight improvement. Well, it's you didn't do any testing. We need, there needs to be a little bit more money in this research where, okay, we want to test out this one particular amino acid because they say tyrosine helps people with ADHD. Let's just go with that. We'll test tyrosine levels first, and only select the people that are deficient in tyrosine, and then give them that and do it for long enough. A lot of times people are only doing this for a month. It's sometimes it takes 3 months or so before you kind of see a difference. Right. So I think a lot of it's going about wrong, mainly because probably there's just not enough funding. Comparatively, with pharmaceutical funding, there's a lot of funding. And so that's why the research that's being done is really hard evidence. It's well, yeah, that's why you got to use medications. There's plenty of research on this, and we've done testing before and afters and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes to natural medicine, it's kind of half-assed done. Honestly, I mean, sometimes we see some really good ones that actually did their due diligence, and I like seeing those coming about. But yeah, it's just because there's not a ton of money like, yes, the supplement company is a multi-billion-dollar company. It's because there's tons of other companies. There's several companies that are contributing part of that pie. But it's not in the investment for like the pharmaceutical company to invest in something like that, because that would go against, that would put them out of business.
Yeah, no, that would be incredible if we were able to set up a scenario like that, like even for other conditions as well. Like,
well, exactly. Just take mental health in general. Like that's one thing that I think should be definitely invested into is investing more into advanced science in the brain and in mental health, and ways to test for it, ways to look at the brain, and making it more affordable to do this testing. Like the technology is pretty much there. It's just not being used. Like if you looked at probably what the technology that I'm sure NASA and I'm sure, the military are probably using, I guarantee they have way more advanced stuff that we haven't even seen, and that could honestly be used to actually advance health, especially in mental health.
What's sort of a message you'd give to, because I'd imagine there's going to be quite a lot of people listening to this who are like, yeah, like I've suffered from ADHD for years, man. Like, what's like one message you'd like to drive home to those, like if they want to maybe like get in touch with you, work with you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like probably the biggest thing, kind of what I've been saying throughout this entire, podcast, is the approach of your ADHD always gets to be first identifying the root of the problem. And that's what we do, is we look at why are you experiencing all these different symptoms? And so that usually requires doing a more investigative work through lab testing. We do a lot of high functional lab testing to understand really what's going on there, and not just thinking a supplement's going to solve all the problems. It isn't. Like that's just like one stepping stone to get things going, but it requires first getting a good roadmap of your imbalances in your biochemistry, and then knowing what nutrition to implement and focus on, what lifestyle changes to implement, and making that more of your medicine. And so, I mean, I think you'll have it somewhere in the link here. I do have a free ADHD health guide that goes over like basically a lot of the supplements that I do tend to recommend, but a lot of the foods that I tend to recommend with ADHD and what foods to avoid. And then also what just standard labs, because even just starting with standard labs, a lot of people just miss that they could go through their primary care doctor, that I think are really vital for people with ADHD. So I have a list of all that you can download, that guide that I know Lucas will provide here. But I mean, if you want to get in touch with us, like you can download the guide, and then there's opportunity. You can book a appointment with our health expert that we do, and then we do work with people within our program more in depth, helping with your ADHD and to that fullest capacity.
Yeah, awesome. I'll make sure to leave that linked in the podcast show notes for those listening in. But otherwise, I think this has been a great discussion around a topic that's oftentimes really misunderstood. I think you've done a really good job at breaking that down and explaining that to my audience. I mean, we could also sort of talk about our favorite nootropics. I mean, I know you've experimented with a lot of different.
No, I know you have to as well.
We'll probably dedicate that for a second
for
episode
sure.
in the
like
future.
A nootropic hash out.
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think both of our audiences would crave that topic. So
for sure.
That'd be a lot of fun. But yeah, otherwise, if people want to connect with you again, just your YouTube channel. Do you want to
YouTube channel, just all my socials. I mean, I'm primarily on just YouTube right now. It's just Dr. LeGrand, so dr.legrand. And then you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all those. But I'm primarily active on YouTube. I talking about focus, right? That's the platform I focus on. And so you can see we do live streams every single week on Wednesdays, and then I also post always a new video on Mondays. So if you're someone that suffers with ADHD or looking for brain health, like that's the channel to go to, and that's what we focus on.
Yeah, awesome. Well, today's discussion was great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, well, Lucas, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome.